We are right on time for the panel discussion. So any of you that might have questions for Alison, please pop them in the chat. But we had 3 different perspectives on implementation at the front line. So if I could have Alison, Kate and Claudia back on the screen. We've got 20 minutes for some discussion, and I thought to have some questions to pose to the panel, but by all means, please, all of you, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. And we know that this is a really big area. Where on earth to start? So if you want delegates to take something away so that they could apply at least one thing that you've conveyed in practice, let's think about those of us working in aged care service organisations, because we're all acutely aware of the barriers that stop our staff from being able to deliver new initiatives. And so one thing that you think is pivotal to get people started on the path of making true sustained uptake of evidence into practice, what would that be? And I'm going to start with you, Claudia.
Thank you, Rajna. Thanks, Kate and Ali, for your presentations as well. They were fantastic. Really enjoyed listening to them. Okay, so the one thing that I think is pivotal in getting people started is to map the context. I think it's something that we have been routinely doing as part of our projects over the last couple of years, and it's just incredibly informative to sit down with all of the people who are going to be involved somehow in the implementation, whether they are the people who are the going to deliver the intervention or receive the intervention or whatever it might be. But it gives a really comprehensive understanding of what their day-to-day context is like. It gets a really deep understanding of that, what the workflow is, what the pain points are for them along the way, and then you can work with them to generate solutions so that they're kind of coming up with the solutions themselves. As Kate very beautifully put in her presentation, you're not coming in and telling them what to do, that you're actually working with them, deeply listening to what they're saying. So yes, that would be my pivotal piece. Thanks, Rajna.
No worries. And Kate, what are your thoughts?
Well, mine are very similar to Claudia, so I agree with Claudia. Yeah, I suppose it's just getting people in from the start. One thing I didn't talk about that Claudia mentioned quite a bit is talking about workforce training. So making sure that the training around whatever your initiative is or the research finding is, that it really is also co-designed with the workforce and with providers. And that's where Claudia's framework that she was discussing is really useful as well. For example, if it was Good Spirit, Good Life, how do we develop a good training package that makes it easier for it to be taken up by the workforce? You know, what from delivery to what are the knowledge gaps and how can we bridge that in between? So that's something different.
That's a perfect segue into Alison, because in her presentation she talked about the falls algorithm and how a workforce is such an important component of that. So what are your thoughts, Alison, about a key aspect to take away to build on Claudia's and Kate's thoughts?
Yeah, look, I can't agree more about the co-design sort of aspects of this, and it's not just the co-design. I think it's the co-design of what you're implementing, if it's using a particular a device or a tool or a technology or a guideline, but also co-designing the strategy. And the example I'll give is with the VR technology, which was co-designed with older people. So all of the content that goes into that, that's available for people to use with the VR, is co-designed with older people, for older people. But in the implementation of that in the facilities that we worked with, we had to really work with the staff to co-design the strategy that we were going to follow. And the reason, the importance for that is one of the things we encountered when we first went into the facilities was they'd had a really bad experience with VR technology before. So they looked at us and thought, oh, here we go again. This is just going to be more of the same, and it didn't work last time. And so we spent quite a bit of time with them demonstrating it, letting them use it and so on. And they were really pleasantly surprised that this was quite different. And then we worked with them about how to approach implementation. So I think it's, yeah, that's an example, I guess, of why. Yeah. Leadership is absolutely critical as well, I'd have to say, just to add to that. Yeah, having leaders that are really supportive and will role model is really critical.
That's another perfect segue into the next question, was around the crucial enablers that we can build on to support that evidence-based practice change in aged care. And Alison, you mentioned the need about the time to work with people to be able to work that through. So I mean, projects usually are funded with very short timeframes in grant applications. How do you get that time to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's really hard, and it's often condensed much more than you would like it to be in an ideal world. I guess when you're putting in grant applications these days, we actually start earlier in terms of working with the organisations or the sites that we want to include on that project in order to seek their permission to involve them even before the application goes in. So that does, I think that's important, because you start to sow the seed and have the conversations and start that early. But yeah, once the funding comes through, it's really, you're often quite condensed, but it's really critically important to actually allow for that time. And often you're doing the ethics application at the same time. So you can sort of, I guess, start having some initial conversations without being involved in any of the data collection, but really the planning phase. Yeah.
Kate, that's probably a perfect segue for you, because that was one of the things that you really emphasised. Did you want to add anything to what you've already spoken about this?
I think if you do take the time to find out what, for my area of work, what Aboriginal community priorities are and Aboriginal community controlled organisations are, then you're more likely to get uptake in the end. So, for example, you know, a lot of Aboriginal community controlled organisations and some of our mainstream provider partners were saying, for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander residents, we're putting in so much extra time to make sure that the cultural needs are met, but that is not shown anywhere. It's not acknowledged by, you know, when we get our audits done and, you know, all of that. How can we need a tool that can kind of show that exactly. So now that there is that, and it can be a key resource against the standards, it's useful for the providers, and it's more likely then that it will be, that it's practical and useful, and then will be taken up, and also, as Alison says, supported by upper management then, because you've been working with the upper management, with the providers from the beginning.
But I mean, talking about the time though, my understanding is that with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, quite a lead in time, you know, because the relationship needs to be developed. They need to trust you. They need to, so what, you know, how long does that actually take? And are we in it for the long haul, if you like?
That's exactly it. So we've been working with the same, you know, I mean, for Kimberley communities since 2003, and I was working before that as ACAT. And, you know, the health services and aged care services we've been working with in this region has been for a very long time. Our elders governance group have been with us for a very long time. It does take a long time to build that, but it's not just the length of time, it's the amount of time you put in, and it's that respectful relationship. So actually doing what you say you're going to do, and really feeding back as well, because the last thing you want is to have that reputation of a researcher that's in and out and no one ever knows what's happened. So you have to be in it for the long haul. And when that means you do additional things that aren't necessarily research type thing. So it's going around and, you know, helping with the organisation's expo, or, you know, all the additional things that you do as part of your ally, being an Aboriginal advocate and ally. That helps too. Yeah.
But that is now something that can be considered in the academic impact, can't that? All of those allying.
Yes, it's been fantastic. Yeah, it's a lot more useful for us, rather than just on papers. Yeah.
So Claudia, I mean, these principles that Alison and Kate have said, how do they translate in aged care as in the service delivery environment?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points to pick up on there. And Kate, I think what you're saying about, you know, building that time and feeding back and making sure that you're not just flying in and flying out as a researcher. I think that applies so well to our context as well. You know, we're often asking our staff to recruit participants for our projects and to be involved in projects themselves. But it's so important for us to keep them abreast of that journey and what's happening and what happens at the end, because otherwise too they put in all that effort for supporting us to do the research, and then what are we telling them at the end of it, and how do they know what impact they have made as part of that project? So that's important. I think the other thing about the executive management and leadership, I think is critical, and that's about identifying all the people that are needed in that implementation process, and really deeply understanding what their pressures and priorities are. And if we can have management on board, but understand how it fits in with their many priorities, that is really helpful. And the third point was around the co-design and the time it takes for that engagement. We've been really fortunate at Bolton Clarke to be able to put the time into some of our governance processes, and we've worked with our internal HREC committee to now have blanket ethics for the co-design component of a study. So we don't have to wait for that to go through as with other projects. So that's fantastic. It gives us the opportunity to get right in there straight away, get that stuff moving while we're putting in the ethics application for the other components, because our HREC committee have seen the importance of that part of it and how time consuming it can be. I hope I answered the question.
And so, and any other crucial enablers, Claudia, that you think we can build on to support evidence-based practice change in aged care?
I think linking in a little bit with understanding who all the different players are in it is understanding what other pieces of work are underway at the same time. You know, how can we link perhaps with a project that's underway in our group analytic department, for example, that can support the work we do and mutually support them as well. So rather than reinventing the wheel, trying to connect all the pockets of action that might be happening around an organisation or the broader community.
Fantastic. I do have two questions for Kate. One of them was from an earlier question from Vicky Long. What are the best avenues to pursue cultural training for staff and ethics committees to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
Okay, well, I suppose what's the most important thing is to recognise, you know, there's diversity right across Australia, and there are, even though there's some very similar overall cultural perspectives, like the centrality of spirit, which is, and you know, almost an international perspective on having a good life for all First Nations people. But there is so much diversity amongst regions. So really try and find your local provider, so a local cultural trainer. So for example, if you're in Noongar country, find a Noongar trainer who can provide that training to your staff. It depends. Different trainers are based in with different companies. So just have a good look. If you're not sure where to start, perhaps contact your local Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Service. They might be able to give you some tips. Or your local Aboriginal Community Centre also might be able to give you some tips on who's running the best kind of training sessions in your area.
Fantastic. And Melissa Knott asks, can you please highlight some of your key strategies for influencing policy with your research findings, Kate?
Yes. One thing we did with Good Spirit, Good Life, which I hadn't done previously, but I think it's definitely worth it, is we actually hired a policy writer who could write up that policy document for us, which was really useful just to have everything and every different, I think I spoke to you about the continuum of care, so every different section we could just say, oh, Nick Morgan, this is your section in green. You only have to read this bit, and whoever's under quality indicator, you have to read this bit. But it shows, because often everyone's siloed approaches and don't often know what's going on. So it shows also what's happening across there. Get involved in committees. That's it's another time-consuming thing, but it's all around connection. Get involved in those committees, and that's how people find out what you're doing. And work closely with peak bodies as well. So, we have AAG for us, it was called NAGATSIAC, now NATSIAC, it's the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Aged Care peak body. And if people within those committees come along with you from the beginning, then they're more likely to advocate for whatever your initiative, because they believe in it and they trust in it. And then meet with policymakers and things.
Thank you. So Claudia, a question for you. I'm looking to develop an implementation guide of a model of dementia care that other service providers can follow to establish a day centre for people living with dementia based on our organisation's day centre. What would your advice be for some key components to include in this guide?
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. But I guess it would follow a little bit. I'm not quite sure how you'd lay it out in a guide, but it would follow the questions of the framework that I spoke about at the beginning. So right up front as to why this guide is needed and what the objective of it would be, and the evidence that underpins it is very important, but of course that needs to be written in language that is understandable by whoever's going to be using the guide, and then following on from those other questions as who will benefit, who would be the best person to deliver the implementation strategies or whatever else is thought of. The implementation strategies is a important consideration in it, like how are you going to get somebody to take up this type of guidance, and how do you know how do you know it's going to be making a difference? So thinking through some metrics of data collection as well. But I'm more than happy to speak in more detail with you if you'd like at another time.
Well, we're almost at the end of this session, so I'd just like to thank all of you for presenting some great talks today. And the main points really is know your stakeholders, spend time to develop relationships and the trust so they start to trust you and engage well with you, work on their priorities, and building those connections is so important. Listen is a really important thing in order to be able to do things that matter to them. So thank you so much, and I will pass it on now to our next presenter, Professor Judy Lothian, for our next session.
Thank you.